You're 52, maybe 58, and someone in a meeting just talked over you like you were the intern. You went home, opened the retirement statement you've been avoiding, closed the browser, poured a drink, and stared at the ceiling like the ceiling had answers. Sit with this one for a second before you scroll away. According to a study published this year in the journal Intelligence, overall human psychological functioning peaks between the ages of 55 and 60. Not 25, not 35, 55 to 60. I'm Frank, and the reason you feel like you're finally sharpening up right when the culture starts calling you obsolete is not a coincidence. It's on schedule. Let me tell you what this study actually did because it matters. Two researchers, Gignac and Zajenkowski, built something called a Cognitive Personality Functioning Index. They pulled together 9 different constructs: fluid reasoning, crystallized knowledge, working memory, conscientiousness, emotional stability, agreeableness, and a few more. And they mapped how those move across a human lifespan. The old story was that you peak young, fast brain, sharp reflexes, all the horsepower in your 20s, and everything after that is a slow leak. That story is wrong. When you weight the whole system, judgment, patience, the ability to sit with a hard problem without panicking, all of it together, the peak lands in the late 50s. And it lines up almost exactly with the age range where people hit their highest wages, their highest occupational prestige, and their most consequential career moves. That's between 50 and 60. Now hold that in one hand. In the other hand, hold this. Schroders ran their 2025 U.S. retirement survey and found that Gen X expects to retire with about $712,000 on average and believes they need about $1.12 million. That's a gap of roughly $405,000, the largest savings gap of any generation they surveyed. Only 16% of Gen Xers in that survey think they've saved enough. Fidelity's Q4 2025 data puts the average Gen X 401k balance at $222,100. The National Institute on Retirement Security reports the typical Gen X household has about $40,000 in retirement savings. And 40% of Gen Xers have saved nothing in a private retirement account. CNBC covered this in November. 69% of Gen X workers say they're behind on retirement, and 47% say they're significantly behind. So here's what you're actually holding. Peak psychological functioning in one hand, financial reckoning in the other. And most of the coverage you've seen only shows you the second hand. That's what I want to fix tonight. Let's start with what's actually happening in your head, because you feel it and nobody's naming it. A Harvard-MIT study by Germain and Hartshorn, referenced in Rich Karlgaard's work on late bloomers, tracked which cognitive abilities peak when. Working memory and raw processing speed, the stuff that helps a 22-year-old memorize a chemistry table overnight, those peak in the 20s, and then they fade. That's real. But that's only one column on the scoreboard. Empathy and certain kinds of pattern recognition keep improving through middle age. Vocabulary keeps growing. Wisdom, defined as the ability to weigh competing considerations and find the workable answer, peaks in the 60s and beyond. The tools that matter for hard decisions in a complicated life peak now, not when you were young. The 2025 intelligence study flagged something else. Older adults are about twice as likely to avoid the sunk cost fallacy. Read that again. When a 30-year-old has poured 2 years into a bad relationship, a bad business, a bad job, the odds are much higher that they'll keep going because they've already invested. When someone in their 50s looks at that same situation, they're way more likely to cut it and walk. Call it a specific cognitive upgrade. You've watched enough things fall apart that you've stopped mistaking effort spent for value gained. The younger version of you couldn't do that. The current version of you does it while making coffee. Same study, conscientiousness and emotional stability, which the researchers describe as the two personality traits most tightly linked to career success, both rise from early adulthood into the 50s and 60s. Your ability to follow through on hard things and your ability to stay steady when something goes sideways are both stronger now than they were at 30. You know this. You watched a coworker in their late 20s melt down last week over an email. You didn't melt down. You read it, thought about it for 10 minutes, wrote a 2-sentence reply, and moved on. That's peak functioning showing up in the room. The study also gave a name to something you've been feeling. The window of peak psychological fitness for complex, consequential decision-making, the messy stuff, the stuff with real stakes, mortgages, business decisions, custody, care for aging parents, whether to leave a job. That window is 40 to 65. Real declines don't show up until after 65 or 70. So the cultural story that says you're winding down at 50 is not only wrong, it's inverted. You're in the middle of the exact window where humans are best equipped to handle the hardest problems. Which is a weird thing to hear when you also feel like the world is quietly writing you off. Let me stay on that, because here's what makes the money side so infuriating. The issue isn't that Gen X made worse decisions than other generations. The issue is that the timing was brutal. New York Life reported that the average Gen Xer didn't start saving for retirement until age 31. Compare that to millennials at 27 and Gen Z at 22. Why? Because 401ks replaced pensions right when Gen X was walking into the workforce, and nobody had a decade of muscle memory built up around how to use them. Then the 2001 crash hit right when Gen X was in early accumulation. Then the 2008 crash hit in the middle of what should have been their compounding years. CNBC noted that this generation has lived through 8 recessions. 8. If you were unlucky enough to have your first real 401k money in the market in 2000 and again in 2008, you spent your accumulation decade watching your accounts get cut in half twice. That's a policy and timing failure that landed on a specific age band, not a psychology failure. And when Fidelity's most recent data shows Gen X workers now saving 15.4% of pay on average, including employer match, you're seeing a group that got a late start on the system and then started shoveling. Half of Gen X, according to that same reporting, is actively worried about outliving their savings. That worry isn't a character flaw. It's an accurate read of the math. So the picture is, you're smarter than you've ever been, more emotionally regulated than you've ever been, better at cutting sunk costs than you've ever been, sitting in the peak decision-making window a human gets, and you're staring at a spreadsheet that says you're behind. That contradiction is the thing nobody's naming. And it's what's making so many people in this age group feel a low-grade crazy they can't explain. Here's where it turns. There's a study you should know about. Azoulay, Jones, Kim, and Miranda, working with MIT, Wharton, and the U.S. Census Bureau, published a paper looking at the age of successful startup founders in the United States. Not the movie version, the actual data. What they found flips every assumption the culture pushes at you. The average age of the founders of the top 0.1% highest growth startups in America is 45. Not 25, 45. A 50-year-old founder is 1.8 times more likely than a 30-year-old founder to build a high-growth company. Founders in their early 20s have the lowest likelihood of success in the entire data set. The full working paper puts the mean founder age at 41.9 and the top 1 in 1,000 growth founders right at 45. That's the data point that flips this whole conversation. The story you've been fed, young people are the innovators, if you didn't do it by 30, you missed it, runs in the opposite direction from what the numbers actually say. The same MIT study found that founders with at least 3 years of prior work experience in the specific industry they started their company in were 85% more likely to launch a highly successful startup than founders with no relevant experience. 85%. That's the edge that domain knowledge gives you. And who has domain knowledge? People who've been doing something for 20 or 25 years. The Kauffman Foundation has been tracking this for a while. They reported that more than 25% of new U.S. entrepreneurs were between 55 and 64, up from 15% in 1996. Their most recent indicators data shows the 45 to 54 cohort has the highest new business creation rate of any age group in the country, at 0.39% of the population. Kauffman also flagged 35% surge in first-time founder applications from the 55 to 64 group between 2015 and 2024. And people 55 and older now own 43% of small businesses in America. Look at the picture those numbers are painting. The generation that's supposedly done is quietly running the actual entrepreneurial engine of the country. And when you pair that with the psychology study, peak functioning at 55 to 60, peak decision-making window 40 to 65, cost avoidance twice as good, conscientiousness and emotional stability still climbing, the picture stops looking like a comeback. It starts looking like the age at which a human being is finally fully assembled to do the hard thing. Before I keep going, I've been working on something on the side, a book called Psychology of Gen X. It gets into a lot of this, the stuff that got wired into you young and what it's doing to you now, the patterns you can't quite explain about yourself. Links in the description if you want to look. And to everyone watching and sharing this stuff, genuinely, thank you. If you want to go a step further, there's a Patreon too. Subscribers get early access to videos with no ads, and you help keep the channel running. That link's right there as well. QR code's on screen. Now let me get to the piece that's tricky. Dean Keith Simonton, a psychologist who spent decades studying creative achievement, has a line I keep coming back to. He says there's only one way to be an early bloomer, but there are countless ways of being a late bloomer. What he means is, early success runs on a narrow track. You have to be the right kind of gifted at the right kind of thing at the right time. And then you have to not fumble it. Late success runs on completely different physics. You can arrive from any direction. You can pivot at 47 and be the country's leading expert at something by 55 because you brought 2 decades of a different discipline into a new field, and now you see things nobody else sees. Simonton's work on the so-called 10-year rule, the idea that mastery takes about a decade of focused work, often gets quoted as a rigid law. He's clear that it's an average, not a fixed threshold. Later bloomers often compress the arc because their other capacities have finally synced up. They know how to focus. They know how to eat criticism without falling apart. They know what to ignore. There's also research by Carol Dweck on what she called the entity theory of intelligence. If you were told as a kid that you were smart, that intelligence was a fixed thing and you had it, you often become brittle. You avoid hard problems because failing at them would mean you weren't actually smart. That's the trap the early bloomers fall into. If you spent your 20s and 30s getting kicked around a little, if success didn't arrive on time, if the winner label never stuck to you, you develop something different. You develop the ability to try, fail, and try again without your identity cracking. Mechanically, that's the thing most correlated with late-stage success. You are running on the personality operating system that the research says wins. So put it together. Peak psychological functioning at 55 to 60. Peak decision window from 40 to 65. Cost avoidance advantage over younger adults. Rising conscientiousness. Rising emotional stability. Vocabulary and pattern recognition still climbing. Wisdom not peaking for another decade. Founder data showing your age band is the highest probability age band for building a real business. Domain knowledge giving you an 85% edge over someone who's never worked in the field. Kauffman data showing your cohort is already doing it in huge numbers right now. And on top of all that, the specific cognitive pattern: try, fail, adjust, try again, don't take it personally, that the research says is the actual engine of late achievement. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the $400,000 savings gap doesn't exist. It does. It's real. Schroders and Fidelity and the National Institute on Retirement Security aren't making the numbers up. But I will tell you this. The tools you need to close a gap like that: steady judgment, cost avoidance, follow-through, industry knowledge, emotional regulation under pressure, are the same tools that are peaking in you right now. And the doors that a lot of your peers assume are closing on them, starting the thing, running the thing, building the thing, are, according to the actual data, opening at exactly this age. Which means the culture picked the wrong scoreboard. It measured you on the scoreboard where 25-year-olds are winning and told you that you lost. The real scoreboard, the one where a fully assembled adult with 2 decades of pattern recognition sits down to solve a hard problem, you're at the top of that one right now. You just haven't been told the game changed. One last thing to sit with. A lot of people succeed late for a reason that has nothing to do with suddenly getting smart. They finally got permission, often self-issued, in the middle of some ordinary Tuesday, to stop optimizing for a scoreboard that was never scoring them fairly. They stopped trying to be the 30-year-old version of successful and started using the equipment they actually have. And the equipment you actually have, at this exact moment in your life, is the best equipment you've ever had. It will keep getting better for at least another decade before anything meaningful erodes. You aren't late. You're on time. The rest of the world is just running a different clock. And here's the thing to hold against the voice that's going to come back the second you close this tab. The voice that says, yeah, but the money. Yeah, but the years. Yeah, but look at what everyone else already built. The people in your age band who succeed late almost never describe it as a breakthrough. They describe it as a subtraction. They stopped doing 3 things they used to do. They stopped asking permission from people whose opinion didn't actually pay them. They stopped treating every setback as evidence about who they are, and started treating it as information about what to try next. And they stopped comparing their inside, the doubt, the tired mornings, the spreadsheet dread, to somebody else's outside. That's the whole move. Dropping 3 habits your younger self needed and your current self has outgrown. The 2025 intelligence study has a phrase for what's underneath that. They call it the integration of cognitive and personality resources. In plain language, the parts of you that used to fight each other finally started working together. The thinker and the feeler stopped arguing. The planner and the doer stopped canceling each other out. That integration is what peaks at 55 to 60. Coherence in place of raw horsepower. You have coherence now. Use it. Quick thing before I go. Psychology of Gen X came out of doing this channel and realizing all these topics connect into one bigger story about how you got built. So to everyone who was able to get it, or anyone thinking of getting it, thank you for supporting the channel. Genuinely. If you're looking to get it for yourself, scan the QR code on screen right now. That's the whole thing. Go watch the one on the screen. It picks up right where this one leaves off.